And our final spotlight speaker, please join me in welcoming Richard Zikuno, Action Learning Group's lead at Yield Health and an alumnus of the Global Health Corps. Richard, please.
Thank you very much. And as my two colleagues were speaking about their leadership journey, I was also reflecting on mine. And there are very similarities in there. When I was 12 years old, I had the opportunity to join an organization called Curious Minds. I was just in primary school by then. And they focused on child rights advocacy. I had the opportunity at first hand to be involved in national programs on advocating for children's rights, traveled throughout the country in Ghana, and at first hand saw how a lot of young people do not have access to education, girls do not have access to contraception, and unsafe abortion very prevalent in Ghana. This was at a very young age, and I saw at first hand what inequality also meant. And so I volunteered a lot of my time during my primary school days, high school days, and my university days with a lot of local-led organizations and international organizations. But I quickly realized that I was quite good enough to be a youth champion, a youth volunteer, to travel and tell the stories, the impact, but they were not ready to invest in my leadership. When I wanted funding for a project, I didn't fit their criteria. Beyond the programs that they wanted me to implement, there was no capacity building for me as a person. And so over the years, when I was part of such voluntary programs, for me it was very disturbing. And I remember in 2018, one organization I did work for, we gathered data on, maternal health indicators in Ghana and also adolescent health, sexual reproductive health and right. And once we were done, we wanted to do more, but there was no funding. But then my colleagues and I didn't give up. The people we worked with in the communities were asking, we came to them, we gathered their data, their evidence, we listened to their stories. What is the outcome? And so my colleagues and I went on to do more on our own, with our own networks, and with our other young people that we knew. And we presented the findings of the data that we collected at the Ghana Adolescent Health Conference. And I was lucky enough because some of the findings that we got on out-of-school young people when it comes to comprehensive sexuality education was very revealing. And so at the conference, we were invited by the Ghana Adolescent Health Strategy Committee, which was in the process to present our data. And luckily, that data made its way to influence the policy. Now, we did this not with big funding from INGOs. We did this because we were dedicated and committed. After that work, I was recommended for the first inaugural United Nations Sustainable Development Goal Action Campaign Awards. And out of over 700 projects, I was one of the 7 young leaders who won that award that year. But when I got on stage, I was very sad because all the people who gave me applause in that room, they came from big NGOs. They were donors, and I knocked on their doors. They were not willing to fund the project because we didn't fit into their structures, their frameworks, and their metrics for measuring outcomes. But I was lucky. That year, I discovered the Global Health Corps Fellowship. Once a fellow,
always a fellow.
This fellowship was based on listening to young leaders with lived experience who had the potential to make change. Yes. And that changed my life. Because for the first time, I could put words to some of the things that I was experiencing: inequality, discrimination, power dynamics, decolonizing global health. And once I left the fellowship, I became a leader that I would not see an inequality and not address it, because I lived that experience. And I'm not the only one. There are hundreds, many of us. And whenever we meet, we are talking about health systems, because that is what the fellowship does for us, to work in health systems. Because we realize that things have to change, but you also need those with the lived experience to be able to change things. And since then, the fellowship have gone on to work with different organizations, including particularly donors, on how first, they should compensate youth work. Second, they should build capacity for youth transition and try to find new generation of young leaders. But then we realized quickly that they always do not have budget to build capacity beyond projects. They have $1 million project, but cannot compensate a young person $50 to buy internet to get on their own Zoom or webinar. You are looking for a young, marginalized person to speak at your event. That description you gave does not have access to internet. That description you gave may not be able to use the internet, but you want to hear their story. You cannot compensate. But why? Because the financial systems you work with cannot do a simple transaction, but you are not willing to change. And for me, with my first job that I did with an organization, I was supposed to implement a project on digital health. And they were not willing to pre-finance these young people for the project. They wanted them to use their own finances, and after that, they will provide them finances. I said, no, I am a product of that system, and that is not going to happen. Because my fellowship experience taught me that when we see it, we have to speak out. And it takes leaders who don't sit at a desk and say, okay, this is my work, this is the structure, we cannot compensate you now, we can do it later. And I have worked with many people who have given that reply. Oh, we cannot, this is how we work, this is how we do it. And then they do it that way. But once you go to a leadership fellowship, we don't do it that way. We will speak to the system to change, because I realized during my fellowship that these systems are colonial, these systems exist, but we need to work through them. And so in my first role, what I did was that I asked, what can we do? They said, okay, we just need to make sure that the money we give to the young people will be accounted for. We need to make sure that we get receipts back. We need to make sure that we are able to account for it. I'm saying if that's the problem, that's okay. I had to work for over a month to open an alternate bank account that will make sure that we get the funding we needed to give to these young people so that they don't pre-finance a project meant for a big INGO with their pocket money. And it was possible, but that was because I spoke up against the system. The system wanted assurance that they will get their money back. I gave them that assurance. Because as global health leaders, when we find system barriers, we don't leave them. And so for me, that was very important. And so living here today, it's very important that we continue to reflect. If we are working with young people, if you are here, you are a donor, you are an INGO, your systems can change. Your systems can be flexible. Your systems can work for the people who matter. But what is also important is that you get people with lived experience to be in your positions. Because what I realize is that when I face those challenges, I think of my experience. I think of what I went through as a young person who used my pocket money to travel, who pre-financed trips to come to New York sometimes, and took 3 months to be compensated. I think of that and I make that change. So it's important that we continue to also hire people with lived experience who understand the needs of the people we work with. And at the Yield Hub where I work, this is what we also do. We do run action learning cycles for organizations that want to learn more about compensating youth work, how to build capacity for youth transition, and how to find new generation of young leaders. And I was so glad that Berta Chulu, who is an alumni, her organization, she also worked in an organization and we were thinking about how to compensate young people. They joined our action learning groups and they were able to develop policies around compensation, and now young people are being compensated. And so building system leaders is important because when we see an inequality, we don't say no. Thank you very much.